Good morning, everybody. Thank you for finding the time to join us for this webinar. This is actually the nearly the culmination, because actually the report will follow this, but nearly the culmination of the skills survey that we invited members to participate in last year, looking at the skills requirement for the industry, the tourism hospitality industries, principally run by eHotelier, but obviously it was distributed through the ICE members, and a number of I know a number of you participated. So this is the I say almost the culmination of this. This is the presentation of the results, and I wanted to invite Peter along to present the results. Because Peter is a friend and colleague of mine. He's also the chair of eHotelier. Formerly, in a former life as an academic, Peter held positions at Bournemouth University, west of London, and Blue Mountains, I think, Peter. But has been a consultant, as I say, and chair of eHotelier now for a number of years. And Peter kind of led this project. So we're looking into, as I say, the skills requirement of the industry going forward, and it was a particularly pertinent time because, of course, the industry is just coming out of COVID and recovering from COVID, and so the findings, I think, are really interesting in terms of what the industry believes are the skill requirements for the future, but also the indication of how they've responded to the COVID crisis and the shortage of staff that's resulted from that. So yeah, I think there's an awful lot in here to pick over, and of relevance to the ICE members, and we will basically watch a recording of a presentation that Peter did of the results, and we watch that for about half an hour or so, and then we'll come back and have questions. I think there should be a lot of questions around the results. But yeah, over to you, Peter, and we'll take it from there.
Craig, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I know wherever you are in the world, it's not morning necessarily, but here in Bournemouth it is. As Craig said, this is a video recording done by Matthew Stevens, who owns eHotelier, and myself, and we did this deliberately so that we've got a reasonably consistent approach to these presentations. This will be the fourth of these types of webinars for the different organizations that partnered in the actual research itself. So you're going to watch a video for a while, and I'll stop it at an appropriate stage, because there is part of it which then follows, which is probably not quite so relevant as far as you're concerned, but you will have the opportunity to watch the whole thing if you like, and we will be making a report that may be published by the end of this week, actually available to everybody, and that's just as a free download. So I'm going to start by actually just showing you the video. Be here.
Peter, maybe you could start by explaining the background and the purpose of the survey.
Yes, of course. The survey really came out of work that we had done during the pandemic in producing a white paper published by eHotelier that was trying to understand the implications and the impact of the pandemic and what longer term effects those would have over the industry as a whole. And it's interesting to go back and look at that document and reflect on what we were suggesting might be happening, and in reality, what has actually come to pass. And I think I feel proud, really, of the fact that we were able to identify a number of key areas that where the pandemic was going to significantly impact, and that has proven to be the case. So what we were now looking at is to say, well, okay, we are where we are with that. We're out of the pandemic now, but the changes in the industry are really quite fundamental in some areas, and they're having a longer term impact. Let's see if we can see how the skill sets that the industry are looking for the future, how have they changed? Have they changed? Has the business model changed? And really try and get a better understanding of how education and training needs to change in order to meet the industry's requirements as we now move forward post-pandemic.
And you can see there our global partners in this survey. The survey was distributed to the members of these associations who kindly partnered with us in gathering responses. And thank you to all our audience who participated in the survey as well. So our agenda today, we're going to kick off with an overview of the respondents before presenting and interpreting the results in 4 areas. Firstly, the impact of the industry, the impact on the industry, the impact on recruitment and retention. We'll look at the skills needs for the future, and we'll wrap up with the training and education needs as well. So Peter, could you explain an overview of our respondents?
Yes, we distributed the survey electronically using SurveyMonkey, and we were able to get over 800 usable completed surveys, usable responses. And as you'll see from the slide in front of you, that we were able to get responses from literally all over the world. And you can see the percentages of the respondents there, but we felt that that gives us a really true international flavour and an international response rate that reflects what's going on in the international industry and not just in one continent or the other. And in that sense, it means that the respondents are, or the value of the respondents is such that we've got a very good representative survey of what is happening in the world. Now you can see from this particular slide that we identified the respondents by roles, and we were looking particularly to ensure that we had that right sort of representation from the senior executives, chief executives, presidents, directors of hotel and other types of operating companies, the operational and specialists, the people on the ground who were actually making the businesses work. And we also needed a good reflection from education and training. And so you can see the relative proportions of those in terms of the overall roles of the 800 respondents. They in turn represented 49% of them were working in hotels, 29% were in restaurants, caterers and allied types of industries, and 22% were from education and training. Now, what we were also particularly interested in is to try and ensure that we had a good representation of the different sizes of businesses. So we weren't being dominated by large corporate responses, but we were getting responses from every particular business size. And so you can see from this particular graph how that has actually worked out in reality. And interestingly enough, if you look at the largest component, the 1,000 to 2,500 members of staff, that represents 17%. And they, of course, would be the major corporate players. But as we go round, you'll also note that we had 14% of the respondents actually were coming from businesses that employed less than 10 staff. So we ensured that the small and medium enterprises, as well as that sort of middle ground and the corporates, were all well represented in terms of the survey overall, and indeed the respondents. Now that gives me confidence that we have a significant response rate that is reflective of the international business as a whole, by size, by distribution, by role, that we actually have a very, very good reflection of what the total industry feels it needs in the future.
Okay, so the first area we looked at was what skills does the new generation of hotel professional need? Peter, how did the responses turn out?
Well, these were, again, very interesting. I mean, this is the whole point of really what we were trying to achieve, is to find out what the industry as a whole thinks it needs for the future, not just for today or tomorrow, but in the next 5 to 10 years. And so the basis of the survey was trying to understand what those skills needs are. And what came out was really quite surprising, as we'll see in a moment. It's worth just at this stage just looking at what we thought the impact of the pandemic had on the industry overall. And the key finding really was that the pandemic has resulted in the industry undergoing huge significant change. And what we'll just now quickly talk about is the nature of some of those changes. one of the first questions we asked was about their business model. Do they think their business model that they were operating pre-pandemic will be the same in the future? And the answer was a resounding no, as you can see there. And that is then further explained in the next slide when we look at some of those key issues. So yes, they all agreed that it's been significantly impacted. 86% said this was the case. They also took the view that the industry was likely to be smaller and leaner in the future. And I think we're already noticing quite a few issues in that regard, aren't we? Where we've got closure of certain business chains, certain operations are beginning to find it difficult to be able to maintain particularly their business model that was there in the future, in the past, into the future. So we're actually having to find and see that these businesses, unfortunately, are disappearing. So we are already noting that the industry will be smaller and leaner than it was pre-pandemic. And that means, of course, that, the business model needs to change to reflect the economic, the social, the behavioural changes that we've noticed taking place post-pandemic. Technology does have an important role to play in the future, and we asked a specific question in relation to technology, not to look at whether there might be impact of things like artificial intelligence or robotics, but how will technology actually impact on the operational roles within the businesses. And yes, it does have and will have an important role to play. But I think it's even worth mentioning at this point that that role is in support of the service that they're delivering. It's not replacing the service that they're delivering. There is also a view that we do have now as an industry to have a real commitment to sustainability. And you can see from the response rate there that that was completely agreed by 94% of the respondents. And this issue about sustainability to meet the UN sustainability goals and to be seen as being a sustainable industry is particularly important. Consumer pressure on looking for sustainability is actually impacting on the way that the businesses have now actually got to be able to respond to that. And finally, here, in terms of the impact of the industry, education and training definitely needs to change, not only to keep pace with the industry and the changes taking place within the industry, but perhaps to reconsider their curriculum development to be able to better reflect the skills needs for the future.
So Peter, the second area that we looked into was recruitment and retention, and I don't think anyone in the industry would argue with the fact that staffing, particularly recruitment and retention, is the biggest issue now. What were the results of the survey?
Yeah, well, they were just reinforcing big time exactly the points that you made, Matthew. Recruitment and retention are and will remain for some considerable time to come the biggest single issues that the industry is facing. And that applies internationally, it applies to every single size of business. And as we'll see as we move on, we've had to adapt to new work practices in relation to recruitment and retention in order to be able to secure staff. But some of the really big operators and the big brands were actually confirming the view that they need to be much more flexible now in recruiting their workforce and to be able to accommodate those individuals. And a good example of that was one of the major brands was saying that for the first time they've had to introduce part-time and flexible contracts. So up until now they've worked on full-time permanent contracts. Now they themselves are recognizing those changes and are having to change their practices. Now another interesting example is in Europe, where talking to a number of general managers about, and just to give that some insight into a very small segment of that even within their food and beverage staff, whereas pre-pandemic they may have had a staff of, let's say, 30, now that's probably tripled in size because they have had to develop much more flexible working patterns to accommodate the needs of the workforce. So instead of the contract that used to exist, I'm the employer, here is your contract. If you want to come and work for me, that's what it means. Now it's much more a negotiated contract with the workforce because you need the workforce, but they are almost the ones now saying, yeah, I'd be delighted to come and work for you, but I can only work for you here, here, and here. So this requires a much more complex set of HR arrangements than you've ever had before, and a much more complex set of contractual arrangements in order to deliver the service to your customers.
So in terms of the impact and the implications of the recruitment and retention, Peter, can you walk us through those?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, well, as you'll see, 94% of respondents still consider this is the biggest challenge and will be the biggest challenge. And what we've seen through the pandemic is we've had losses to the profession. In America, that was called the Great Resign. In other parts of the world, it's just parts of the workforce have just disappeared and they don't intend to come back into the industry. So they've either gone to other industries or they've made the decision that they don't want to work at all, or they've got other forms of employment or other forms of income and so on. So we've lost a huge number of people who were employed pre-pandemic, who've actually chosen not to come back into the workforce. And part of that is because they want a better work-life balance. And I think the pandemic has brought home to many people the importance of home and a life outside of work compared to just living to work. Now, the work is to create enough opportunity for them to live a much more balanced life than they were before. They began to realize that health, well-being, family values, external values to work are much more important to them than purely working. So that leads on to the point I've already made, really, in that now employment needs to be much more of a negotiated partnership between an employer and an employee. You can't dictate terms to employees anymore. You've got to negotiate those terms, and everyone may well be different in different ways. That leads to this issue about complexity of managing a much more flexible workforce. You could end up with double the number of staff working for you. They might be working for other people as well, but you've got double the number of working for you than you had before. So it's much more sets of complex relationships. And that's areas where technology can help, perhaps, in terms of managing this increased complexity. What's clear as well is we're not attracting new entrants to replace those that are leaving. So there are big gaps, especially in the new entrants into that workforce. Obviously, we've got more people that you're trying to recruit. You've got people who are leaving. You've got a much more complex workforce situation that you actually got much greater costs of recruitment. So retention all of a sudden becomes much, much more important. Hanging on to those that you've already got, supporting those that you've got. Hanging on is probably the wrong term, but you know what I mean, in that you've got to look and work with them in order to retain their services and develop them in the way that they want to be developed and you want them to be developed. So you've got greater cost to recruitment. The talent pipeline that seems to be available, or potentially could be available, just doesn't have the professional skill sets. We've heard even yesterday, I was at a meeting yesterday when one of the hoteliers was referring to that they're having to take people without skills and skill them themselves, because there aren't people with the professional skill sets that they need available in the potential workforce. So they're having to rethink through all the time now, where am I going to get the staff? What sort of staff am I going to get? And what investment, both in recruitment and retention, do I need to make to ensure that I can deliver to meet my customers' expectations. So that leads to the greater investment required in training and career development.
So speaking of the work-life balance, how is that playing out?
Well, as we've already had a little bit of an indication there, but we did ask the specific question in relation to younger new entrants. And the younger new entrants are really expecting a completely different approach to employment than the generations that have gone before them. And they really want to have a much, much better work-life balance. And as you can see from this, over 95% of the respondents strongly agreed with the view and came up with the fact that this is a real priority issue for the industry. How do we recruit young talent into the industry as new entrants and give them what they're looking for, which is a much better work-life balance? Now, when they're in work, they also want to be valued. They may well be aspirational, but not aspirational in an old-fashioned career-based sense, that they're actually looking, and they're looking for different sets of values. And that's been interesting to try and understand as well. What they're looking for is the match between their expectations and values and the company. They're not prepared to go and work for companies that don't share the same sorts of values. And those values can be to do with sustainability, to do with employment practices, to do with ethical standards, to do with the way that that company behaves in the corporate world and behaves to their customers, and importantly, behaves as far as their staff are concerned. So there's an awful lot happening almost under the radar, if you like, that's not that visible, but all of these complexities are coming into play now.
So we've looked at the impact on the industry and also the impact on recruitment and retention. Now we're going to look a little bit deeper at the skills needs for the future. How are the skills needs changing in the future now, Peter? What have we learned from the survey?
Well, what you learned there, as you'll see from this particular slide, is that there is a clear understanding that we need professional basic skills. They need to be there. Those professional skills are what are required to deliver the service expectation to meet the customer needs. So we've got to recognise that we still have a really big demand for that professional skill sets. All of the things that we value about hospitality and about the industry, and whether they're chefs, whether they're front of house staff, whether it's a barman, whoever it is, they have a huge professional skill set, and we need to value that skill set, but we also need to ensure that we can develop it appropriately. So that's the first thing that came out. There was a view perhaps some years ago, you don't need professionals anymore because I think the answer is you need professionals even more now because of the expectation of the guests and the ability to deliver to the guests' needs. Now, we then asked questions in relation to education and training, and we'll come back to this a little later on. And the key here was that the respondents didn't think that the current hotel schools, colleges, universities placed enough emphasis on developing the required professional skills. So they were concerned that the education training system was not giving their students and their potential employees adequate and sufficient professional skills development opportunities so that they really could benefit when they became part of that workforce. And I think that's particularly important. We've seen that over time. You could refer to it as the academic, becoming more academic, horrible word, but and what we've tended to lose in there is that professionalism of the vocational skills that we essentially need as an industry, but as the students need in order to provide, to ensure they've got a well-rounded education that they can then take forward into employment. Otherwise, they've only got half the game. They only understand half of it. They don't actually know how to do it. They might understand it, but they don't have the skills to be able to put it into practice. So that's clearly an issue. The other is the importance of professional development in recruitment and retention as we move forward, in that that's got to be an offer that's on the table. When somebody comes, they want to be able to see what investment are you as a company going to put into me to ensure that I have the development opportunities that I'm looking for, but you also need.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so looking at the essential skills then, we're talking about those professional skills. Can you talk a bit more about those professional skills, those essential skills?
Well, what you see here is where we asked people to put these things in some sort of ranking order. And what you see here is the results of that. So their first rank order was what they feel are essential skills for staff, or the professional skills. Second rank was customer service, guest service skills. Thirdly, communication skills, and we'll come back to that in a moment, and financial skills. So this was just looking at what are employers looking for. Really, those four sets are the most essential components that they're looking for. We didn't try and break that down in terms of by level of employee, but these were the general sense of what I need for my business are professional skills, customer service skills, good communication skills, and an element of understanding financial balance sheets, budgets, and so on.
Okay, and then in order to deliver a high standard of guest service, what were the top responses there? Well,
again, we've shown these in ranking order. So the first one was communication skills. This was specific. Sorry, I'll say that again. Specifically in relation to guest services. So the first was the importance of communication skills, listening skills, the ability to interact, understand, and then that leads on, of course, to cooperation with others, working in the team, the ability to delegate, all of which does relate very much to the ability to communicate as well. Third rank was the problem solving, to be able to deal with operational problems as they occur, not to have to refer them to other people, the ability to understand, observe, identify a problem, and then come up with a solution, and an immediate solution that meets the guest's needs. An element of creativity and innovation, and that could easily be linked to problem solving. How am I going to solve this particular problem? I'm going to do it by doing this, but you want people to be able to take the initiative, and you're looking for them to be able to demonstrate that sort of creativity and innovation. And the fifth rank was this multi-skills idea, cultural awareness, planning, analysis, and to some extent language skills, but that wasn't a universal requirement. But I think the whole notion of being multi-skilled, multi-aware, culturally aware, socially sensitive and so on is particularly relevant when you're delivering high standards of guest service.
We're certainly speaking to hotel groups now where the traditional roles of food and beverage and accommodation are now being merged, and we're seeing an associate who's trained in right across all customer-facing areas of the operation. As a result of staff shortages and skills shortages, but also as a result of being able to schedule these multi-talented, multi-skilled staff across multiple areas of the operation.
Yeah, and that, of course, leads into this whole issue about flexibility, doesn't it? You've got to have flexibility within your workforce, and that the individuals may be able to be working in one area for one shift and then working in another area for another shift. And that whole issue about employment flexibility, but also relates to career aspirations. It relates to job satisfaction. Do I get more satisfaction out of doing one role or many? And how do I interact in terms of the guests? But it is, I think there's a lot there going on there in terms of not just skilling, but this whole notion about sensitivity, cultural awareness, social behaviors, understanding what the customer needs, and how do you encourage that high degree of observation, that high degree of perception amongst your staff to recognize what it is that guests are actually looking for, solve the problem, sort it out, communicate the response, and satisfy the guests.
So there's been a saying in the industry for as long as I've been in the industry that we hire for attitude and train the skills. When you can't find the skills, you need to hire for attitude. In the survey, we looked not just at the skills, but also at the personal qualities. So what were the results of, what did the industry say for personal qualities?
Well, that was, again, very interesting. And these are shown in ranking order. So the first thing they were looking for was honesty. And I don't think that meant honesty in the fact that they weren't likely to take money out of the business. It was honesty in terms of their behavior, honesty in their interaction with their guests, interaction with staff, interaction with the business. And they were also looking, that's the staff personal qualities, but the staff were also looking for honesty and high ethical values from the company as well. So it comes back to my point about a negotiated partnership. So they were looking for that that degree of honesty, that openness, if you like, of saying, yes, this is the case, not trying to obfuscate things and hide things. So honesty, particularly, very important. High ethical values. So, and I think this also relates to things like the wider issues going on in society and indeed in the environment, that people are now becoming much more aware of what it is that are you being honest, decent and truthful, and what are your values, what do you stand for, what do you stand for as an individual. And as I said, I think all of these you can also relate almost to the cultural values of the organisation. And you've got to get a match now between the personal qualities that the business is looking for and the corporate qualities that the business represents. And that's where these come in. So you've got honesty, high ethical values, trust and integrity. If I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. An element of passion and confidence in themselves and what they're doing, but also this idea that I'm empathetic. I understand what people are looking for. I'm empathetic to my team members. I'm empathetic to the guests. But I also have a certain degree of humility. I'm not brash. I'm not overbearing. I'm actually recognizing that other people have a view and have a place, and their view is just as important as mine. So these personal qualities are the things, and we ask that question in relation to what would you be looking for when you interview members of staff. And this is where this ranking came from.
So the fourth area we looked at, which you touched on earlier, is training and education. And the question we asked was, does education and training have to change to keep pace with the changes in the industry? Some fascinating results in this area. Do you want to take us through it?
Yes, by all means, yeah. Now, this one is really quite stark in that the industry view of academic qualifications in relation to their staff, we don't know because we haven't done it in the past, but they're saying they're not quite as relevant as what they would see as the professional qualifications or the professional recognition. And that's quite important as far as education and training goes, because that suggests to me that the industry is not really valuing academic qualifications in the way that they may have done or seen them in the past. And that might be to do with this academic drift that might have taken place, that the courses have lost that professional vocational value sets that they used to have. And as a result of that, the industry is saying, well, yeah, it'd be nice to have, but it's not anywhere near as essential as we might have seen it in the past. And that, the counter to that, if you like, is the professional recognition. Now, there's a historical element to this, which I find quite interesting as well, in that for many hoteliers, depending upon when they started off in their careers, they might have been put on a management scheme, a graduate management scheme for a particular company. And of course, it was that degree of professional recognition from that organization that actually was their stepping stone to their next role and their next promotion and throughout their careers. So this idea of professional recognition is not a new one, but because I think we've seen the academic drift going in one direction and becoming less professional, what we are now looking for is how do we recognize the professionalism of the individual? And that is through that recognition through professional development. And so there is a role here, and there is perhaps there's a role professional development, clearly, which gives that degree of professional recognition. But there is also an interesting observation, perhaps, for the academic educational world of saying, okay, guys, how relevant are you now for what the industry is really looking for in the future? What do you need to think about that you can change so that you are more adaptable, perhaps you are more flexible, but also you are more in tune with where the industry is going? And part of the problems with all of these is that academic qualifications tend to get fairly rigidly set for quite a long period of time without the opportunity for that degree of change. Whereas I think the basic premise of our argument is that the pandemic has caused huge changes in the industry, but it doesn't seem to have had the same impact on education. Education, there's a time lag here, and education needs to catch up with where the industry is now, and also to be thinking of where the industry will be in the future.
So in terms of the detail.
Okay, Craig, I think we got to a good point. But what we go on to in that is actually an awful lot more to do with professional development for people who are when they're actually in work. So I think we highlighted the key issues as far as education is concerned, and perhaps that might be a good opportunity to pause it there and then pick up on any discussion. Because it does go on for about another 15 minutes, which if you're really interested, you can go and watch again.
Indeed, yeah. No, thanks, Peter. I think as you say, I think that's a good point to stop and maybe summarise and open it up for questions. From my point of view, really, the key elements is how relevant and how timely the survey was. I mean, as I say, it couldn't have come at a much more critical time. All the industry agrees that COVID has had the most significant effect on the industry. I think you'd find very few people in the industry arguing against that. So it's absolutely critical timing. Also, the results are robust. I mean, you could argue that possibly with the exception of Asia, where there's 10% response rate. But other than that, I think it's very representative of the areas where the ICE operates. But I think even in Asia, because these are societal changes, I think what we're seeing within the survey, I think are relevant within Asia, and will be increasingly so. So looking at the key results, I mean, where we're getting sort of like 90+% of the respondents agreeing are that recruitment and retention will be the biggest problem in the future going forward, the next 5 years. And that education and training must change. I mean, it couldn't be much more stark than that. So this is a real clarion call to educational providers, to our members, that change is required. And what's really interesting, I think, and I've seen this kind of locally, regionally, nationally in the area that I am, is that the industry was faced with a massive challenge coming out of COVID. And it's interesting that they didn't immediately turn to the colleges and universities and say, how do we get out of this? How do we collectively get out of this? The industry has sort of said, no, we'll find the solution. And the solution is actually to hire in different sectors. So, certainly within the UK, we're seeing them targeting mature people returning to the industry, people perhaps coming off long-term sick, people with skill sets with no skill sets, frankly, that they wouldn't have even considered in the past, and they're taking them into the industry with the view to, I suppose, seeing if they at least cut it in the first instance, and then probably they'll train them up later. But it strikes me that they've not sort of turned to education and training to find the solution. That they're very much sort of saying we will solve this one, which is a bit of a clarion call for the education institutions. So change is required. And in terms of what that change is, well, they're very clearly saying that the academic qualification They don't see that as being the gold standard in the future. It's not what they'll be looking for. They're looking for professional skills, and either educational institutions provide these and therefore meet the needs, or they'll provide them themselves. I think that's a really clear message. So for me, as I say, it's a clerical change must come, and it must come kind of very, very quickly. Otherwise, the academic programs might become increasingly irrelevant to the industry, which would be just a tragedy, and will increase the gap between academia and the industry. Be interested if anybody else has got questions or comments, because we've got about 10 minutes left. So please, if you just either raise your hand or just we've got about 20 people participating. Have we got any questions? Any comments? Any observations? Do you agree with my kind of like view that how important this is, how significant the survey results are, or is it business as usual? Looking for.
Well, could I ask everybody a question, and they could perhaps put the answer in the chat or something? Across the board, are you seeing an increase or a decrease in student applications for your courses? So I'm interested into knowing, because certainly the anecdotal evidence from Europe, and I've done this 3 times now, and when I've asked educational institutions, with one exception, they've all said that they are seeing a decrease in the number of student applications for their courses. So over time, we've got fewer and fewer people coming into hospitality courses, and they're still seeing that decrease. Now, that may be bucking a trend, that may not be appropriate, I don't know, but it would be interesting to see from this particular group whether they are seeing a similar pattern.
So we've got a response there from Scott that there's definitely a significant increase.
Okay.
Sorry, decrease.
Yeah.
Definitely a significant decrease.
Yeah.
Olivia from DCT, culinary courses applications are growing, but hospitality and tourism is decreasing. That's a real sort of notable trend, isn't it? We're finding that elsewhere.
It is. We're certainly finding that in a lot of places. And one thing that certainly is true, and work that I've done in the UK and Europe, is that things like event management, tourism courses, leisure-related courses, which, at the periphery, that at one stage were very popular, have actually now declining in terms of their overall popularity. Just to give you a sort of an understanding of how small the hospitality higher education provision in the UK is now, there's only 2,631 students currently enrolled on hospitality courses throughout the UK in higher education institutions. Now, you compare that to the number of accountants that are actually enrolled, and they're about 44,000. So, and that number is going down. Of course, the number of institutions that are offering it are going down as well. So I think what we are probably seeing is a significant decrease. We're all seeing the same thing across the world. And so the issue about how do we change that, and how do we make our courses to ensure that they're industry relevant, because if we want to work to get more students, I think we have to work in partnership with the industry and present the whole industry as a much more attractive career option. But in order to do that, the industry's got to value the outcome from the educational process. And if they're not valuing it, they're not going to participate in that.
Yeah. We've got David also saying that they see a decrease. Loretta,
slight increase. Okay, well, that's fine.
That's good.
That's good. Yeah, undergraduates significantly down. Well, that's interesting. Somebody's asked the question, how important are internships for the recruitment onboarding strategies for employers? My argument there would be very important. And what we have seen over time is that fewer and fewer institutions are necessarily offering compulsory internships as part of the course. In many cases, they're actually an optional extra, because they cost more. Obviously, from the student's point of view, they still have to pay for them. It depends how they're built into your program, but they would be looking for placements, internships, stages, whatever, as being part and parcel of the way in which the educational institutions can help to better prepare the individual. I think their arguments are that still that the graduates come out, they have an expectation of the roles because they've been sold the notion of an expectation of the roles that they will be able to hold down, but they have no professional experience of actually working and dealing within that role. And they don't actually understand, if you like, the nuts and bolts of how the role works, or what they're trying to manage, or what they're trying to supervise. And the problem there is that they're saying, well, they're just not worth the money. They're not worth the money to try and get them, because, quite frankly, it takes far too long, and some of them don't last very long, because when confronted with the realism of the world, they go, whoa, not really sure about that. Don't like that very much.
Yeah, I think there's also an opportunity here, because I mean, I think because the industries will be definitely looking for internees, because they're looking for employees. Anyway, there's a shortage out there. They'll be looking for employees. I think there's an opportunity here to negotiate, and they're looking for skills. So that there's an opportunity here to basically say, okay, well, we can provide these internees, but we need you to be working with us on identifying, okay, what skills do you need, and training those internees in those skills areas. So yes, it is quite a start picture. But there is opportunities for colleges and universities to sort of say, yes, we'll provide internships. You provide the skills within those internships. You know, don't just stick them into pot washing and stuff.
That's right, absolutely. But I think Nicole's raised an interesting point. You know, and that's for your participants, what are they doing to increase the cooperation? One of the issues that certainly I was at a big, relatively big, meeting yesterday, which was actually a big group of hoteliers. And one of the issues that they were raising there was, of course, that often the connection with the academic, especially the higher education institution, tends to be dominated by the higher education institution wanting to use the resource of the properties or the hotels for research, or, if you like, slightly more esoteric academic issues, rather than that sort of real partnership in terms of where are they operating, and can we get your students actively engaged. And the problem with that is that in many cases the curriculum doesn't give them space to do that. You know, we all know that actually an average academic curriculum is probably only about 10 hours a week anyway for a lot of universities. But even within that, there isn't the space, unless it's done on a voluntary basis, to have that sort of integration, that opportunity of working with the local industries. They might go and work for them on a part-time basis, but that is literally just what it is, isn't it? It's working on a part-time basis. It's not a structured development program. And what I think we need to see is a much more structured development program with that cooperation with industry. The problem you've got with industry at the moment is they don't see that as an even partnership. They think they're giving away an awful lot, and that education is not really coming to the party.
Yeah. Interesting comment from Alison at DCT, say that they're exploring apprenticeship models. Yeah, I mean, I think we'll see definitely the return of the apprenticeship models within education, because I think that is this managed approach that you're perhaps referring to, Peter.
Yeah, it is, and I'll give you a good example of that. I'm working with Kathmandu University at the moment, and we developed a Bachelor of Professional Hospitality, which is very much an apprentice model. So they spend half the time in industry, literally more than half the time in industry, and then they have, if you like, almost a block release back into colleges. So it's a different type of approach. and it is very much practitioner based. And I think, I mean, the argument I always have on that, well, is all related to professional development, really, in the sense that what do you want the person to be able to do? And I align it where possible to things like medical education, health education, and so on, where so much of their time is actually spent as a practitioner, actually working with patients, working, learning the skills on the job that they need to be able to perform when they're actually in the workplace. And what we've lost is that. We had it once upon a time, but we seem to have lost it now.
Yeah. And again, I think there's, in terms of recruitment, there's the challenges, but also opportunities here, because I think industry will be taking in unskilled people, but they will be looking to upskill them. Now they can do it in-house, but more easily if colleges and universities offer that service to them, but in the way that suits the industry. I think that's
correct.
The critical point.
That is the key. That is the key. And one of the arguments that came up yesterday, which was a very, very interesting argument, was, well, it's all very well and good, but of course it's fine for the academic institutions, but they work to very fixed calendars. We don't. So it's no good for us coming along, it's this flexibility issue that we're not responsive enough, we're not flexible enough to be able to respond to the industry needs, because their needs are much more present, if you like. They've got businesses that they're trying to run, whereas, of course, from our point of view, we're tending to be saying, yeah, sure, we can do that for you, but it's got to be the third week in March or the second week in whatever, because that's the space I've got in my curriculum calendar. But we're nowhere near that degree of flexibility to be able to participate directly. And I understand that, because it's more cost to us. You've still got the, if you like, the basic business to run. So if you're going to do these things, you often need other people to do them, which increase your cost base. So I understand that, but there is a big discussion to be had, I think, with the industry about what is it, how is it, and part of the purpose of what this research was really all about was to help to start that dialogue, start to facilitate that, and raise the issues for both industry and education. Because unless we do collaborate together, then unfortunately, we're not winning. We're not winning.
No, indeed. Okay, well, now we're just in full sort of discussion mode, but also I'm very aware that people have got other commitments and meetings kicking in, etc. And we have hit the hour mark. So yes, I'll draw things to close and thank Peter for his presentation today. Certainly, I find it, as I say, really, really interesting and really timely, the results here. As Peter says, there will be a report coming out from this, and we will share that with members, or it will be available to members. If there's the desire to follow up on this and have a future webinar, we can also organise that. If people want to return to the topic and unpick something in detail, please let me know. But thank you, Peter.
Pleasure.
A pleasure, and thank you all for attending. It was really great to see you all and to see all the comments and questions coming in. Thank you very much indeed.